Hi, Francisco. Thank you. Now, you're the head of the research group on Latin America at Middlesex University. We're all very interested to find out what's happening in Peru. I'm just going to play a short video of something. Here we go. Now that was taken yesterday. Protesters, a mass mobilization of protesters, calling for the release of former President Pedro Castillo, as well as calling for a constituent assembly. Now, last week, President Castillo was jailed and ousted and replaced by interim President Dina Boluante. Can you tell us the background? Because Peru was one of those pink tide countries that we're also hopeful about. President Castillo was elected last year. Can you tell us what's happened since he was elected and how we got to this situation?
Yeah, it was a big surprise to the oligarchy in Peru that a rural primary school teacher of indigenous stock actually won the election. I think that showed two things. Number one, the level of discredit of the system was such that no Lima politician, which is where the oligarchy is based, was able to muster sufficient votes to win the election. The most important political party, Fuerza Popular, Popular Force, managed to get 14%, less than 14% in the first round. So that gives you an idea of how bad it was. In fact, the surprise was so amazing that nobody knew Castillo in Lima at all. In fact, CNN had to actually find out very quickly, scramble for some CV, some information about this person. Now, he came with the promise of burying neoliberalism. And obviously the masses, as we know now, were ready. But he, instead of calling on the masses to go for the burying of neoliberalism, which he was going to do through his promise of a constituent assembly, he never called on the masses to mobilize. And therefore he became prisoner of an oligarchic-dominated parliament, which is dominated completely by the right wing. In terms of the support that he had in parliament, he had Perú Libre, Free Peru, a left-wing political party with 15 deputies. And then Juntos for Peru, together with Peru, for Peru, had only 5. So that's 20 in total. And they were not completely reliable in a Congress of 130 deputies. So what happened, because he didn't mobilize the masses for his program, then he became prisoner of the shenanigans of the Congress, and they sabotaged literally every imaginable, no matter how trivial proposal he made, he was sabotaged immediately. And they went for impeaching minister after minister after minister after minister all the time throughout this period, 1.5 years. The information is that the Congress managed to impeach 78 ministers he had to change over this period. So imagine,
78?
78, yes, that's right. It's similar to the British government, but you know, there are some limitations to that analogy. 78, so he was pretty much paralyzed.
Well, you can't govern if you have to keep changing 78 ministers. So that the parliament, they undermined him from the start.
Totally. I mean,
so
it's a parliamentary dictatorship.
Why didn't he call for mobilization? Was that because he couldn't?
Well, he tried to look for some breathing space, hoping that sections of the parliament that were not completely extreme right wing would sort of accept some of his proposals, but he got it wrong. Nobody, supported everything or anything that he proposed. So by the 7th of December, the parliament went for the third time to try to declare his presidency vacant, which is a provision in the Peruvian constitution. And then he finally was, on that day, was actually declared, he was impeached on the following premise: permanent moral incapacity. That was exactly the words they used. And
moral incapacity.
Moral, permanent moral incapacity, which looked like, sort of chronic disease on the basis of it.
Wow.
So clearly they wanted to get rid of him, and they haven't been able to muster sufficient votes on the two other occasions until on this occasion they did. So what he did, and this is in a provision in the constitution as well, he called for closing of parliament and then calling for elections to set up a constituent assembly to produce a new constitution in order to do what he wanted to do 1.5 years ago. And the result was he was in prison, as we know, and then the masses erupted because they found this so outrageous. And now what we have is a country in rebellion. And the United States supported the ousting, of course, right away. The ambassador, Lisa Kenna, issued statement on the same day, on the 7th of December, saying that Parliament should be allowed to fulfill its mandate. And the mandate of the Parliament was to oust Pedro Castillo. So the United States supported this. And as a consequence of that, now they have a huge rebellion in the country. As you can see, the masses are so irate that they're even able to push back the military forces. However, 22 people already been killed as a result of army repression, because the new government called on the armed forces out in order to keep law and order. You can imagine the consequences of that.
Yeah. Now, the other countries in Latin America have all signed up to support Castillo. How effective do you think that might be in changing things?
It will certainly encourage the mass movement. You have Mexico, Colombia, Bolivia, and Argentina that issued an official document saying that they condemn this as a coup d'etat and they recognize Castillo as the president. And then the ALBA countries, which is Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Caribbean countries, and so on, also issued a statement declaring the same thing and also saying that they recognize Castillo. So it means that the Peruvian government, the current Peruvian de facto government, is under siege from the region. And the United States seems to be the only one that is supporting it, but not very actively. So this will encourage the mass movement quite massively because they know they have friends in the rest of the continent. And my sense is that the progressive governments and the left-wing governments in the region are not going to tolerate that this is done because it's completely unacceptable. If they get away with this, they might try somewhere else. And that's why I think it's so important, this support, which is not known in the international media because the media has omitted this information, of course.
Yeah, so is there any way practically that people in this country can support the fight back against this coup?
Well, I think what we can do is mobilize MPs, trade unionists, and people of public influence. Obviously, everybody is important. And what we want is, number one, is to demand that his immediate and unconditional release and freedom for Pedro Castillo. That's number one, that they should hear the clamor of the masses to take the army back to the barracks, because this is not the way to go about the problem. And number three is they should hear the demands of the masses for an immediate election of Congress with a constituent assembly powers, which is what they are demanding from, and complete halt and stop cessation of repression.